tonight, I'd like to have a moment of silence in the memory of Dr. Harold Kurtz, who was a dear member of our Maccabi family. Thank you. As you know, for a year and a half during the pandemic, we had a lot of these Zoom interviews. It was very exciting, all sorts of different topics, and it got us through the pandemic. But as the pandemic was starting to wane, we hope, and our tryouts started to begin for Maccabi, we sort of refocused our attention on the tryouts and less with these Zoom calls. And in fact, when Steve Graber, who's my producer, so to speak, threw a few ideas at me for the President's Forum, I kept saying, no, not interesting, not interesting. I said, Steve, you better come up with someone really intriguing and interesting. And I'm proud to say that Steve knocked it out of the park because he was able to land Chaim Bloom, the Chief Baseball Officer of the Boston Red Sox. And with that, I'd like to welcome you, Chaim. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
I know it's been a very busy schedule. Today was supposed to be an off day, but you had a rain-delayed game finished up today. So thanks for coming. I'm glad it worked out.
Happy to be here, especially after a win.
So that's good. So let's start a little bit with your upbringing. What was your upbringing like in Philadelphia?
Well, as you mentioned, I was born in Philadelphia, moved out to the suburbs when I was about 5. My parents still live there. In that house where we moved in 1988. And, I was, born to, an eye doctor and a French and Hebrew teacher, and basically went to Jewish day schools my whole life until college. We lived out, like I said, suburban Philadelphia. So grew up there, went to a day school right there, which has since moved and changed names, but it's still going strong. And from there, I don't know where you want to where you put the line of demarcation between upbringing and whatever came after, but that's basically the Cliff's Notes.
Were you a big sports fan, or do you play any sports?
I was a big sports fan. I'm a terrible athlete, so playing sports didn't really get me very far, unfortunately, but at least I was a good enough self-evaluator to realize that at a very young age. Baseball was always my passion, but like I said, I was no good at it. So if I was gonna, make it my life in some way, I was gonna have to figure out a better way to do it.
So if you weren't a sportsman, so to speak, not a big sports fan, what influenced you to pursue a career in sports?
Well, I was a big sports fan. I just wasn't good at playing the sports. I loved baseball, and as I went through high school and into college, I started to think about ways that I could just make my passion my career. And that was a time, so we're talking, I started college in the fall of 2000, and that was a time when paths into the game on the baseball operations side were starting to open for people with non-playing backgrounds, and increasingly so, at that time. And as I started to look more and more into how to do this, essentially the room became a little more crowded. Theo got the job here in 2002. Moneyball was published the year after, and it started to be kind of more and more a thing that people without playing backgrounds might be able to come into the game and have some kind of an impact. So I was trying to do anything I could to get into baseball, basically scratching and clawing and networking my way in. Was fortunate enough to do a few internships. But really, I think persistence obviously matters a lot, but so does being in the right place at the right time. And I was fortunate to get a few great opportunities that led to where I am today.
So did you just get into the game when the whole analytic thing was taking off?
Yeah, it was starting, the information revolution in baseball, so to speak, was starting to pick up steam. It's always, I think in many ways, a lot of this stuff is not as new as we like to make it seem. Probably the greatest baseball executive of all time is Branch Rickey, and he's been dead for decades. And he was, as into, using information to win baseball games as anybody. And he's as much of an innovator and a pioneer as I think there's been. A lot of these things, again, that, we talk about right now like they're new are not that new. When you think about, in the dugout, people like Casey Stengel and Earl Weaver were well ahead of their time doing some things that became popularized more later when we had more and more information to back them up. but they were using information to make those bets in their time, just as we use it now. But there's no question, starting in the mid to late 90s, so much more information started to come into the game, and teams started to realize more and more that, like any human endeavor, you can use evidence, you can use information to learn more about what you're doing and to try to find better and more effective ways to do things.
So I'm a New York Yankees fan since I was a kid, and what we hear a lot about Aaron Boone is that he's a victim of the analytics and he can't use his gut. We heard this sometimes with Joe Girardi as well. When do the analytics end and the gut feeling of the manager come into play?
Well, I think I would sort of reject the premise there, because I don't think there is any decision that has ever been made in this game that is all one or the other. Managers have been using information, and they've also been making decisions in the moment since this game started. They might not have had the same type of information as they have at their fingertips now, but if you look at a guy and you say, man, I really like the way this guy's swinging the bat, you're using information, right? You're using analytics. You're using, the information that this guy's given you by what you've seen. It's all information. So it's really just a question of what information is relevant to answering the question at hand. I definitely see how people could say, well, the balance has swung too much one way or another, but I really think that kind of misunderstands how a lot of these decisions are being made, whether they're decisions in the front office or whether they're decisions in the dugout. Decision makers have been doing that since the game started, and they've always used a mix of those two things. They've always involved preparation, and they've always, necessarily had to make decisions in the moment, because no matter what information you've prepared with, the decision in the moment may be a little different. There might be things that you can't anticipate. And part of making those good judgment calls is understanding how much what you see in the moment should move the needle, one way or another from what you thought about when you prepared for that decision.
Thanks. It's really good to hear that. That's a really great point of view that a lot of people aren't used to hearing. So I got a little bit ahead of myself, but I wanted to go back to, as an observant Jew, what anti-Semitism have you encountered in your life growing up in Philly, going through college, or professionally?
Yeah, I feel really, really fortunate that I can't think of any that I've experienced firsthand, especially in connection with my career in baseball. I'm not so naive as to think that stuff's not out there. We know it's out there. But, I'm fortunate. I don't take that for granted. I know that has not been the experience of a lot of American Jews, and it's not been the experience of Jews in baseball or in any profession. But I'm fortunate. If there has been any directed towards me, I've never felt it. And like I said, I consider myself lucky.
That's great. How do you manage all the internal and external operations of the team that take place during Shabbat?
So at the risk of disappointing this crowd, I am not Shomer Shabbos. So I do work on Shabbat. So that's sort of the easy answer to your question. Whenever possible, I'd like to make time to try and come home to make Shabbat, but often I'll go back to the ballpark. There are certainly days, and this is not uncommon, I think, in any of my counterparts or colleagues, that we all have things in our lives where we're not necessarily available, in non-emergency situations 24/7, 365. I think it's no different from a lot of other businesses where, in the medical profession, the Jewish doctors are on call, Christmas and Easter, and then they get repaid at other times. I think we work together in a similar way. Obviously, there can be emergency situations where you have to be available. But, any good organization, you're going to have good teammates, and everybody's going to pick each other up. And family is really important in this organization. It was important in my previous organization. That's one, excellent thing that both have in common. And if you say that, you have to mean it. And even though this business is very demanding and very competitive, and everybody who's in it is not working normal hours and is putting in a lot of effort, you have to make sure to make time for things that are important off the field, so to speak.
Thanks. So tell us a little bit about your day-to-day tasks and your long-term goals with the Red Sox.
Yeah, day to day, I mean, one of the beauties of this game is that no 2 days are exactly alike. It's a cyclical business, so the time of year will often dictate what your day looks like during the season. A lot of the ebb and flow of your day has to do with that night's game, or is the draft coming up? Is the trade deadline coming up? Where are we in the season? might dictate the different things you have to do. And then, of course, the off season is a little different. In many ways, it's busier because even though there are no games, that's really where I think you get to work. Anything you want to do to, I think, meaningfully advance your organization is a lot easier to do in the off season, whether it's staffing, whether it's programs, whether it's the roster. A lot of that happens in the off season. And really throughout that time, there's all sorts of long-term projects that are behind the curtain that don't necessarily directly impact that night's game, but I think ultimately maybe more important when you put them all together. All the success, especially sustained success that you see in this business, when you look around the game and see the organizations that are doing it year in, year out, you can bet that there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that was a long time coming that you don't know about. You see the fruits of that in what shows up on the major league field, but there's so many things that go into it, long-term initiatives and scouting and development, and you have to do those things well if you're going to win, on a consistent basis. As far as my goals, I mean, really, the thing that I derive the most personal satisfaction from in this game is coming together with people that I really care about to do something great. And what we're trying to do is win championships. My belief is that the best way to do that is to put a championship caliber team on the field every year. And so that's the goal. That's really what it all comes down to. The game is hard. Your plans are not always going to come to fruition every single year like you hope. Some years the ball's going to bounce your way, some year it won't. I think that's why it's important to have consistency in terms of fielding a really good product as often as possible, because if you do that, eventually I think the game will reward you.
So you spent the bulk of your career, 15 years with the Tampa Bay Rays, and now you're with one of the most iconic and passionate sports franchises in the world. So tell us about the differences in the culture between the two teams and the fan base.
Well, as far as the culture, obviously every organization's unique, right? And, I can't speak to all 30, but every organization is different. Every organization has its own story to tell, so to speak. And the stories that are told are obviously, as you might imagine, very different in many ways between Tampa Bay and Boston. But there's also a lot of similarities I found, especially within baseball operations, within the organization. I mentioned that I think within the walls, the number one thing you hear, the number one word you hear after Red Sox is family. People here mean that. They take it seriously. They live it. And that's something that was actually very familiar to me. And I think that is really that more than anything. I think you can look at the last 2 decades of remarkable success of this organization, and you can point to the culture within the walls and the way people treat each other and deal with each other, and the way they come together to win. And that's also, at the end of the day, why I believe that the Rays have the success that they have. It starts with people and culture. Those are the things to me that are at the root of success more than anything else. People can point to decisions you make. People can point to analytics or scouting or whatever it is. All of that, if it's done really well, is built on the foundation of the people you have and the culture that you have, which is how those people work together. And those things are very strong in both organizations. The fan bases are different animals, in a lot of ways. Look, the Rays, I think their fans in many ways don't get enough credit for how passionate they are, even though the attendance figures are not that high. And here, obviously, I don't think there's a fan base on planet Earth, certainly not in baseball, that is more passionate. There might be some that are as passionate as Red Sox fans. I think it's great. I mean, I couldn't imagine possibly wanting to win the World Series more than I already do. But when you know that you have a chance to make that many people that happy, and you know how much they care, and you know how much they're going to bring the energy at Fenway Park, when we give them something to cheer about, they are there, and it helps. I don't think it's an accident that we started playing better this year when we went to full capacity. Our players feel that, the organization feels that. Makes you feel. Look, I'm not under any illusions that we're saving the world here, but it's nice to be able to do something that has a chance to make a lot of people really happy.
Thanks. So I've been a lifelong New York Rangers fan, and they had a 54-year drought. And when they finally won the Stanley Cup, it seemed like this pressure had been lifted on the fans, the organization. I don't really feel that the Rangers ever felt the pressure again to put out a Stanley Cup team. They did it once. Everyone can die in peace, whatever. The Red Sox, on the other hand, had an 86-year drought from 1918 until 2004, and you won 3 more times in 07, 13, and 18. So I want to ask you the question, it seems to me that in Boston, it's not like the Rangers. The pressure probably increased to continue to win. It didn't decrease.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously I wasn't here then, so I can't really speak to it, but I can tell you that the hunger to win now, people don't act like they're satisfied. That is for sure. Certainly our fans are not, but nobody in the organization is. I think the more success you have, the more you really become addicted to that success and want to have more of it. And once you taste what that feels like, once you know what it feels like to play in October and win in October, nothing else is really sufficient. So I think it's a great thing. I mean, there is this unquenchable thirst for winning here that underlies everything that we do.
Thanks. So your tenure with the Red Sox started off with a couple of major events, a little bumpy road. You had the sign stealing investigations. You had to find a new manager, trading away two popular players, and of course the pandemic. How were you able to deal with all these things at once?
It was a lot. The roster challenges and kind of repositioning ourselves to get back on a more sustainable footing player wise, from a long-term standpoint. That I knew I was walking into that and was prepared for that, although the ins and outs of that deal with the Dodgers were, and the specifics of how it got done, and that was quite a circus, not necessarily something that we could have foreseen. Now the other things, obviously the investigation, the Houston report, and of course the pandemic, were not expected. Those were certainly challenging. The pandemic was obviously something that we were not the only ones going through that, and frankly what it did to us, as devastating as it was to the baseball industry, is really small potatoes compared to what society went through. It was painful, obviously, when you're in the business of staging mass gatherings. Viral pandemics are not your friend, but it was challenging. Obviously, a lot of our employees made sacrifices. It was really tough just for the game as a whole. But we were the lucky ones, really, when you think about it. We eventually, it took a while, but we got to come back and do what we love. And that's puts us on such more fortunate footing than so many people, and we're very mindful that it was a reminder of really what a privilege it is to be able to do this.
Thanks. So are you a fan of long-term tenure plus contracts for athletes, or would you rather shy away from them at all costs?
I think it all depends on the specifics. And any, obviously the terms, the player, the timing, all those things matter. In any situation when you're making those long-term commitments, you are obviously getting a lot of security. You're also taking on some risks. So it's really just a question of balancing those two things. Where are you as a team? I think generally speaking, in those long-term commitments, the early part is usually the more productive part of the contract. So you better be ready to maximize the early part of those commitments if you're going to make them. But, I think one of the beauties of being here is we should have all the tools in our toolbox. I think there's this sort of kind of misperception that honestly used to be the reality, but I don't think is anymore. I think people think that there's certain things that big market clubs do and there's certain things that small market clubs do. Those lines are blurring more and more. And I think if we have any advantage here, it's that we should be able to do all of them. We ignore areas of the battlefield right at our peril. So we should have all those tools in our toolbox, but just because we have the ability to make those big commitments doesn't mean they can be a substitute for doing the little things right and for building the foundation the right way.
So you are a big market team, yet you have a small market size stadium, because Fenway only has 37,000. The average in MLB is 42. Do you feel you're hamstrung by that a little bit?
No, I mean, no way to feel that we're hamstrung by Fenway. There is no place like it. I think it's a tremendous advantage. And more, I think you're seeing some of these newer ballparks are not necessarily as big as some of those multiplexes that were built in the 70s and 80s. To me, and obviously the business and the ticket sales side of this is not my purview, but when there is no place like Fenway. It's an amazing place. When it's full, I would put that atmosphere up against any sports venue in North America. And I think this ownership group, one of the things that, in addition to championships, that has marked this ownership group is really being able to get the most out of Fenway. which is a great thing.
So I've been there, and there's very few places that have the excitement and advantage of that hometown arena. I was just talking along economically because you have less seats. That I just thought maybe as a big market team, do they ever talk about expanding it or no?
That's definitely outside of my purview, but I know that, look, you go back to when this ownership group bought into the Red Sox, and Fenway's been expanded and modernized considerably since then. And I think they continue to look at opportunities, to create value at Fenway Park. But I don't feel, again, I think when you're talking about atmosphere or you're talking about revenue, I think there's ways to maximize that. That are kind of independent of just the sheer number of seats that you have. We are generally, near the top of the league in attendance. So the seats aren't any good unless you can fill them. And, when we deserve it with our on-field product, we fill them.
So do you see any long-term changes to the game coming because of the coronavirus?
It's one of the interesting things I think about the virus and the pandemic for a lot of businesses is that I think it has been kind of an accelerant for some changes that might have been coming anyway, and it might spur some new changes. And it's sometimes hard to separate what's what, because the game is going to evolve over time anyway. I do think there's an increasing realization in our game that just because we have the greatest game on earth, which I believe we do, recognize I'm biased, but just because we have that doesn't mean we can ignore the fact that we are an entertainment product and we are competing for eyeballs and wallets and time with a lot of other entertainment options. So we need to act like it. We need to earn those eyeballs, and that means we need to make sure that our sport is the most exciting version of itself that it can be. And I think that topic has really come to the forefront in the game because a lot of things that we see in our game now happen because teams are competing, they're trying to win, and they don't really care about the aesthetics. That's not our job. So when something like that in service of winning creates a product that might not be as entertaining, I think that's our responsibility to come together. We have a collective action problem, so those need to be solved at the league level. And I think we need to really think critically about what our product is like and how entertaining it can be. And I think the pandemic has kind of given us license to experiment with some things that at least we get to find out, right? We can try them out and see what they're like. And people can have all sorts of opinions and some of the rule changes that have come into play in the last couple of years. And the minor leagues were trying different things, but I think it's important that we try things because in life, certainly in baseball, you stand still, you get passed. So we have to figure out how we can make this game as exciting, as appealing as we possibly can make it.
So along the lines of some of those changes, I could tell you from watching, listening to talk radio, or just talking with my friends that I haven't met anyone that likes the rule that in extra innings, you start with a runner on second. What's your thoughts on that?
I actually like it. So, maybe I'm in the minority. I have learned that few people call into sports talk radio to say that they're perfectly satisfied. So I'm not sure that that's a representative sample, but I enjoy it. Look, I got to see it in the minor leagues for a number of years before it came to the big leagues. I think it adds excitement. I think it adds strategy. And I think it diminishes some of the things that people don't like about baseball, which for as much as we sort of fetishize these 18-inning games, and they are, unique and they are sort of fun to say, it's fun to say you were there, but judging by the number of people who actually stick it out to the end, I don't think people actually enjoy being there for all of that. So I think something that gets us on, gets us an outcome and reduces the amount of roster churn and the amount of roster moves you have to make just to replenish your pitching staff and creates excitement, creates strategy. I think it's been good. Now, at the same time, I recognize my opinion might not carry the day. So whatever it is, we'll figure it out. But I've enjoyed it.
So I can tell you that as a hockey fan, that when they instituted the shootout, everyone hated it. And some people still do hate it, but it stayed. So the question is, do you think this runner on second is going to stay, or it's going to be a short-lived experiment?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think we have the basic agreement is expiring this winter, and a lot of things are up for reassessment. What I like about, what the silver lining of what's happened in the world the last couple of years is that, like I said, it's given us the ability to try some of these things. And so now at least we don't have to theorize. We know what it looks like, and we've seen it in action, and we can decide whether we like it or not.
So I agree with you that I don't like 18 inning games. Most people don't, but we like 9 inning games. But when you go to a doubleheader now, you don't get 9 inning games. You only get 7. So do you think that's a rule that's going to stay as well?
Yeah, that's another one I don't know. I think, I know the commissioner has said that all these things will probably revert once we get out of, all the restrictions that COVID has placed on us. I'm probably not the best person to ask because it's a heck of a lot easier to manage your roster and take care of pitcher workload when you have 14 innings to cover instead of 18. Usually my feelings on the 7 inning doubleheader are strongly linked to whether we won the most recent one or not. So, after that day in New York last week, I wouldn't have minded some extra innings in both those games to see if we could pull it together. But I think it's interesting. Like I said, it sounds like we're kind of starting with a blank slate, and leaving some of the pandemic things in the pandemic, which hopefully we will be able to leave behind sooner or later. So we'll see.
So when you talk about making baseball exciting, I would say in my lifetime, maybe the most exciting time was when we had the home run race, when you had Sosa and Bonds, McGuire, Palmeiro. And clearly baseball looked the other way, these people of the steroid era, but they looked the other way. Baseball was exciting and everyone loved it. It was the hottest thing on earth. Now you look at the spider tech and the whatever they're doing with the spin rate and everything. I think it's the opposite because most people that I know, maybe because I'm an American League fan, we're not looking for 1-0 games and lots of strikeouts. We want to see hits and action. And clearly baseball got more boring. You had more strikeouts, less hitting, the numbers are going down. And I only bring this up because clearly baseball looked the other way on this one too. I think with the steroids, wrong or right, it was exciting. This was not exciting. So why did it take so long for baseball to wake up?
I don't know that people were necessarily blind to the problem as much as, these things, again, are difficult to address. The whole system is pretty complex. It's often hard to pinpoint the root causes of things. Again, I think that's why some level of experimentation is important. You see people credit or blame things. I've seen, people say, well, we need to do this, we need to do that. And when you kind of reason it out, you say, well, that may just exacerbate the problem that you don't like. I think we need to start with, what do we want the game to look like? What do we think is the best version of our game? And work backwards from there and use good critical thinking, some experimentation, some analytical thinking to try to see if the changes we might think of will actually produce the results that we want. But there's a lot of complicated interactions. You have to assume for any rule that you put into place that you're going to have 30 highly competitive actors basically trying to find a way to leverage it for their own game. It's a competitive system. We have to, we have to keep that in mind when we're thinking of ideas. It's not necessarily going to work out in the utopian way we envision. It's going to be competed over. Mm-hmm. And so, some of these things I think are harder to pinpoint. But I commend Major League Baseball for taking some of the steps that they've taken more recently, getting some of the people in the commissioner's office that they have. I know this is a huge part of what Theo is working on over there, to just see if we can be a little more proactive, just devote more energy to trying to figure out this puzzle.
So just to get back to your life on the hot seat and how things change, 6 weeks ago, they were calling in New York for Brian Cashman, who's been there forever, and Aaron Boone's heads. The Yankees were terrible. They were boring. They were whatever. And you guys are on the top of the world. Well, the worm has turned a little bit. How does the press treat you? How do the fans treat you when things go a little south?
Well, I think it's fair to say I was more popular a month ago. But, look, at the end of the day, our fans want to win. When we don't win, they're not going to be happy. I understand that. This is not a business for thin-skinned people. Regardless of whether I think that, a lot of what's being said on the outside is reasonable or not, regardless of whether I think the narrative is grounded in reality, it really doesn't matter. The beauty of this game is that there's a scoreboard. We have jobs to do. If we do our jobs well, over time, we're going to please people more often than not. I do think it's important for us to try to separate, the noise. And, by no means are we perfect, but we are not always imperfect in the way that a lot of observers might think. So we need to make sure we are using good critical thinking skills and trying to assess ourselves. Sometimes it's our job to see around corners. Sometimes what may please people in the moment is not what is going to please them in the big picture. So we need to be mindful of that and make sure we're respecting the passion of our fans, the passion of our media, but that doesn't mean we have to agree with them on every criticism that they have of us.
Did you have to develop a much thicker skin in Boston than you needed in Tampa? Okay.
Well, it's certainly a lot louder outside of our walls here than it was there. But again, it's also louder for the opposition when they come in because our fans are so incredibly passionate. When you have that passion, it's always going to be a double-edged sword when you're not winning. Again, I think it's most important to focus on the things we can control and to try to separate the noise from the things that really matter, the things that really point us to where we're going, the things that allowed us to sift through, a lot of stuff that isn't very indicative of talent, that isn't very predictive, and just try to make the best decisions we can. If you do that, in the long run, you will be hopefully vindicated. We can't control everything in this game, but we should be making good decisions, placing good bets. And if we talk ourselves into not doing that because we want to lower the volume a little bit, it's just going to hurt us. So we can't start doing that. And I have said this before. I mean, I know a lot of our fans have had some criticisms of different things that we've done. Sometimes they may be right, sometimes they may not be. Sometimes a lot of those criticisms, they may flip their opinions when they see how the moves turn out, and sometimes they won't. At the end of the day, I would hope that all the people who are passionate about the Red Sox would not want us shying away from a decision that we think is right just because it's going to be unpopular. I can't imagine that any of our fans would want that. They can disagree on the substance, but assume that that we're in line on the substance. I don't think we should shy away from things that are going to be good for the Red Sox because there might be some kind of a backlash the next day.
So speaking of backlash and good bets, how did the fan base react to the trading of Mookie Betts and David Price?
Well, it wasn't popular, and I understand it. I obviously Mookie is one of the greatest players that's ever worn this uniform, and he is midway through a career that might well be a Hall of Fame career. So I understand all the emotions that are going to go along with that. My view was that it doesn't. I think this move, so much of the focus was on the financial implications of the move. To me, what it really comes down to is we had to look at what is going to, if we're looking at this over the course of the next 3, 5, 10 years, what's going to allow us to win the most. And I felt like we would be in a better position to do that by making that move than not. I think we got a lot of young talent, which I think we really needed at that point in time. If you do not have a sustainable foundation of talent, I don't care how much money you have, you cannot win consistently. That has been proven out time and again. And we owe it to our fans to try to win consistently. This is not a market where people will or should be asked to tolerate 5, 6, 7 year periods of losing. And it doesn't, and there are several examples really within the past decade. If you look at this industry, even teams in big markets with enormous payrolls, if they do not manage that talent base, if they don't keep that pipeline going, they will go through those periods just the same as small market teams might. And at the end of the day, we can't have that. And I thought that we were better set up to do what we need to do for our fans over a long period of time by making that move than not. Was
that the hardest move you had to make in your tenure with Boston?
Certainly, I would say to this point, the most significant. I don't know, hardest, that can mean a lot of different things. There are obviously some moves that are, and certainly I experienced this when I was with the Rays, and, I'm experiencing it now here. The more you're around these guys, the deeper the relationships get and the harder it is on a personal level to make some of those business decisions. We still have to do it. But obviously I was so new here that I didn't have those relationships. I like to think, and, we practiced this when I was with the Rays, that if we thought it was the right decision, you make it, even if it's going to be personally very painful, because we're not in this to indulge our own personal feelings. We're in this to win championships for the organization, for our fans. So, I don't know that it's worth ranking which move is the hardest, but it was difficult. There's no question.
Do you ever feel that you get treated unfairly by certain members of the press?
No, I don't worry about that too much. I mean, they have a platform and a right to use it. That's, that's their business. We just got to worry about our business.
So just to switch gears a little bit, I presume you've been following the Olympics a little bit. I know you've been a little busy with the MLB season, but were you surprised by Israel's success in baseball the last few years and in qualifying for the Olympics?
I think it's been fun to watch. So I have, obviously we have some players of ours in the Olympics this year, and I have some folks that I know on Team Israel, including somebody who helped them qualify for the Olympics that I used to work with, and so had some skin in the game there, I suppose you could say. And I'm not necessarily surprised. I think there's been a lot of effort put into it by a lot of people, and that effort pays off like so many things in life. If you work for it and you mean it and you back it up with effort, you have a chance to succeed. So it's been cool to see them do that.
And I'm proud to say that Eric Holtz was our coach, I believe, in 2013 at the Maccabi. Do you think with the success, there'll be more Jewish athletes who will be playing baseball, will increase in popularity?
That's a good question. I don't know. I hope there's nothing keeping Jewish athletes away from baseball right now. Certainly, there's a pretty proud tradition of Jewish ball players and Jews in baseball that I would hope that there's nothing keeping Jews away from the game right now. It certainly can't hurt. I think, the site, as we have seen in various, venues in international baseball in recent years, of seeing, a row of players standing, with their Team Israel kippot. That's powerful. That's meaningful, for so many people. And, I hope that helps. But I also hope there was nothing keeping Jews away from the game to begin with.
So as you're with the Sox and I'm a Yankees fan for my 63 years, almost 64, I lived through the time back in the late 70s where I go to Yankee Stadium and read in the paper the next day that there were stabbings and shootings in the upper deck. The rivalry was white hot. How do you view this rivalry now? Have things calmed down a little bit?
Well, I think it is maybe the greatest rivalry in sports. We could certainly do without the stabbings and shootings. There's no place for that. But I just think there's so much history behind this that it just makes every meeting, it almost doesn't matter where each of the teams is at a given moment. There's so much weight to this rivalry that every Red Sox Yankees game is special. I saw a whole bunch of them, obviously as a fan, and then as a division rival, and now I've gotten to experience them with a real stake in it, and it's great. I mean, every game is another chapter in this rivalry. Like I said, it might be the best rivalry in sports.
So it's still white hot. In other words, it'll always be white hot. But
I can say for our fans, it most certainly is.
And for my side too, I can tell you that as well. So what advice would you give to someone wanting to work in baseball operations? How does a young person break in? You said it was pretty hard to get in. How does someone get in?
Yeah, in many ways, it's even harder now. I think there's just so many things in life. There's more competition. There's more stages you have to go through. I'm not sure that there's one path that you can lay out where you can tell someone, just do A, B, and C, and you will get in. Like I said at the beginning, you do need, I think, to have some good fortune. You need to be in the right place at the right time. I don't really trust anybody who's not willing to chalk up a good percentage of their station in life to luck. I'm wary of people who are not willing to do that, because I don't think that's how the world works. Certainly, though, there are things you can do to put the odds more in your favor. I think, obviously being passionate about it, learning as much as you can about the game, not just the game on the field, but how the industry works, is important. I think essentially what we're trying to do every single time we hire someone is we're obviously trying to push ourselves towards championships. And that comes from a whole host of different people finding ways to add value to our organization. So I think understanding how the game works at all levels helps figure out, what skills might you have that can add value to this. And, so that gives you a path you can kind of chart. It helps, and certainly I think this is something that's an issue in our game where there's some socioeconomic divides, because it helps to be able to go anywhere and do anything for little pay. I think the game is improving in that respect, because I think we're realizing that we were probably walling off some segment of people who wanted to work in the game in a way that was not to our benefit, but nonetheless, it's still very competitive, and there's market aspects of any competitive industry when you're trying to get into it. I also think being really persistent in trying to talk to people and get advice and learn about the game and pick brains, I think that's really, really helpful. That worked really well for me. But most people aren't going to be able to get back to you, but some will, and you might learn from them. I think the people that I admire the most in this game are people who, doesn't matter how much they've got under them, how long they've been in the game, how much success they've had, they are still learning the way that they probably were learning the day that they started in the game. And that's why they're so good.
So I just got to mention here in the chat box that Juliet Schiff, one of our longtime Maccabi USA volunteers, was just honored by the Red Sox last week for her 15 years of service working for the team. She said you two have yet to meet. So Juliet, where are you? Now I'm going to introduce you to Chaim. Where are you? You can unmute
I'm right
yourself.
here, Jeff. Hi, Jeff.
Hi there. So here now I'm introducing you. I'm making a Maccabi Red Sox shidduch where you can say hello, and that's it.
That's okay. Hi, Chaim.
Hi,
We also
Juliet.
have a little Hagesher USY connection as well from way
All
back
right.
in the day.
Okay. Great.
Hi.
Okay. Hi.
And our colleague Billy Weiss is also here as well, who is a wonderful photographer for the Red Sox. He's hanging out in the background too. I saw him.
Billy, you don't have anything better to do tonight?
This is it. It's either this or The Bachelor.
So, Chaim, other than meeting Juliet tonight, what has been the highlight of your career? It's been a storied career at a very young age. My goodness, and you have a long way to go. What's been the highlight so far?
There's a couple of highlights I have where I was on the other side of some events that didn't turn out so well for the Red Sox, so we don't have to talk about those. Things that happened in 2008 and 2011. I will say something that's maybe a little sort of off the map that people might not expect was in spring of 2016, the Rays, I was with the Rays at the time. We were selected to go play the Cuban national team in spring training, and we were very excited. Amazing. In baseball, we don't get to go to Cuba for obvious reasons. So it was very exciting to be able to go down there and play. And then as details of the event unfolded, we realized that we were not the main attraction. The president was also showing up, and he had a much bigger agenda in play. So we just got to be the entertainment. But that was a pretty cool thing. It was amazing to be standing, in Havana and basically hearing and seeing the American flag over that stadium, knowing the history between the two countries and hearing the Star Spangled Banner being played. I was really emotional hearing that, just knowing everything wrapped up in that politically and culturally and baseball wise. And then, our little baseball team got to go play in front of President Obama and Raul Castro. So that was pretty cool. And we beat them. So that was also nice.
That's pretty cool. So tonight, more than any night I've seen, the chat room has blown up with questions. It's a plethora of questions. So Steve, what I'm going to ask you to do is if you could call out a few that we could ask Chaim. But one of the questions that came into me from Mike Rudzinski was, what would you tell Chaim Bloom 10 years ago if you could speak to him knowing what you know now?
Ooh, good question. That's a really good one. I think, it's interesting, obviously, because a lot of the things that I think of, obviously, I threw my whole life into one organization for 15 years, and then whatever good or bad things you've done there, when you leave, you obviously have a whole new set of challenges and opportunities. So a lot of those things that I would want to do-overs on my time at the Rays, I am actually, given that we are competing directly against them, I am grateful for those, and wish we hadn't been so successful in other ways. Now that I'm competing against what I helped to build, I would say that 10 years ago, as much as we knew that the game was moving, that the game was evolving, and I'm now mostly talking behind the scenes here, a lot of things that only, like I said, they only show up on the field in the form of wins and losses, in the forms of how well you play. I think even then it was still I still would have underestimated the speed and the relentlessness with which the game would evolve, with which the arms race in front offices would take off. And, I learned from that. And it's a big motivator in what I do now. I think I would have cautioned myself that you need to be even further out than you think you need to be, even more daring than you might think you need to be in terms of infrastructure, in terms of how you think about your staff and what resources you need to bring to bear to bring talent into the organization, to develop it. We see now a lot of successful organizations, what they've been able to do in terms of talent acquisition, talent development. And that's where it all starts. Doesn't matter, like I said, small market, big market. It's all about that pipeline of talent. That is the thing without which you cannot win year in and year out. And I think as much as we valued it over there and we knew it was changing and the game was evolving, I don't think it was possible to overestimate just how quickly and how relentlessly that was going to happen in the last decade.
Do you have a mandate from ownership not to go over the cap and incur the luxury tax?
No, actually, this came up, this trade deadline, and we are currently not positioned to do so, but we had the ability to do it. It was really more of a baseball decision than it was any financial decision. Look, obviously, you can't treat the line as if it doesn't exist. There are ramifications for going over, and they're not just financial. Some of them have to do with your talent base. So if you're going to do it, it had better be worth it. But if it was going to be worth it, we had the ability to do it. You look at the history of this organization. I know it's gotten a lot of press because of what's happened in recent years, but the organization's been over the line a lot of times, and under the line some other times. I think, to me, trust me, I worked for an organization that had a payroll about 1/3, 1/4 the size of this one. The one thing that nobody needs to question about the Boston Red Sox is the financial commitment to the baseball operation. That has always been there. You got to be smart about it. It doesn't matter what your budget is. If you spend it poorly, you're not going to have success. So you have to be smart and strategic about what you do with that. But no, there's no mandate. To my knowledge, it never has been. I just don't think that our owners think that way.
Thanks. I see an interesting question here from Adam Formal. What professional baseball teams, what do they do for mental health services? And have there been recent changes as a result of the increased awareness of mental health in sports?
Really, really good question. I think this is something that, we talked about the pandemic being an accelerant. I think it has brought mental health issues to the fore in our game, even more than they already were coming to the fore. I think it's a good thing. This shouldn't be something that we're afraid to talk about. There are some players who have been unafraid to speak publicly about their mental health issues, and I think those players should be applauded. Look, this game's hard, life's hard, and we all are battling different things. And I don't think anybody, if a guy dives for a ball and breaks his wrist, I don't think anybody is poo-pooing that issue just the same. I don't think we should be poo-pooing mental health issues. I do think the industry as a whole has made enormous progress in the time I've been in baseball, where every team, not only in terms of performance coaching for the on-field aspect, but also the off-field mental health aspect. And there is some interaction between the two. Every team is so much better staffed in that area. Every team has some kind of program. Like anything we do, we want to be the best. We want to have the best program in that regard. And I think we're very fortunate here. In the short time I've been here, I've gotten to know some of the folks who will coordinate that program, and I see the passion with which they do their work and the dedication they put into it. But we shouldn't sit here and think that we've got this problem solved.
Thank you. So here's a question from Josh Brodkin, who's the chair of our baseball team for the Maccabi next year. And he says, pitchers today have a more limited pitch counts, and yet there seems to be more injuries today than back in the 70s and 80s when there were 4-man rotations. Do pitchers throw enough? And it seems like this is for me speaking, everyone's getting Tommy John surgery at all ages. What's going on with the pitch count?
Yeah, look, there's some art, some science to this. I do think there's plenty of science to, and this was, I think, fairly, I don't want to ever say proven, because we can always relearn and challenge things we know, but there is overwhelming evidence that there is some correlation between workload, high pitch counts, and injury. Now, I also think now we know so much more about workload and what causes injury than we did then. So it's not just that. That does lead to injury. And I do think there's a debate to be had, about, rotations and things like that. Of if we condition pitchers differently, could they do different things than they currently do? there's definitely room for some debate there. I think really, some of this is just physics. Pitchers are throwing harder than they ever have been. Their pitches are nastier than they ever have been. And the nature of the game with the power threats that lineups have is such that pitchers are almost always throwing at max effort or something close to it. That's going to lead to more injuries. And as an industry, we've sort of accepted that as the trade-off for just a much higher level of performance.
Thanks. So here's another question, Chaim, from Samara Wiener. Women have started to break into coaching in MLB. When do you think women will break the glass ceiling in the front office?
Well, one has. It was way overdue. Kim Eng is the general manager of the Miami Marlins. Kim probably should have had one of these jobs a decade ago, which says something about where we are as a sport. So just because one has does not mean the problem is solved. I think, I've become a lot more aware. You asked me earlier in this conversation about anti-Semitism. I said I'm really fortunate not to have experienced any that I could feel. I'm much more worried about, other groups that I do think have had a much harder time getting the proper foothold in our game, whether it's in the front office or on the field. I think experiences I've had, conversations I've had, have opened my eyes that it's not just enough to be a good person and treat everybody equally, treat everybody with respect. We need to make sure the game is not, certainly not explicitly, but hopefully not implicitly sending the message to people that this game is for certain types of people and not for others. And the fact of the matter is a lot of that is representation. And, I think it can become a circular reference where if we don't have a lot of, women in the game, if we don't have a lot of people of color in the game, then women and people of color may look at this and say, well, I'm just going to try something else because, man, this is going to be a tough row to hoe. We can't have that. So we need to be really intentional about making sure that we are doing everything we can to draw in people who have passion for this game. We should not be fooled into thinking that, we will not benefit just like every business benefits from a diverse group of people in our clubhouse, a diverse group of people making decisions in the front office, diverse group of people making decisions in player selection and player development. But if we want that, we have to mean it. And, we have to go out and create those pathways to make sure that it is very obvious that there is nobody, no group that can say that the game is for them and other people are kind of invited guests. No. This game's for everybody. We need to make sure that we are living that.
So another question came up here from Bruce Apple. Why has there never been a woman become an MLB umpire?
That's another good question. I know that there have been a few female professional baseball umpires in my career. I don't know enough about what goes into umpires rising through the ranks to know, why they haven't been represented at the big league level. I don't see any reason why they couldn't or shouldn't. Hopefully it's just a matter of time.
Thanks. So as we get ready to wrap it up, we're almost at the hour. I think now's the time we can open up the floor. If someone has a question, they want to raise their hand, I'll call on you. If anyone has any questions for Chaim, now's your opportunity. Yes, Marty Bloom, you want to unmute yourself, please. Unmute, Marty. Marty, you have to unmute.
I got it now, right?
Yes, you do.
Okay, you may be one of my cousins. My father was one of 11 siblings. So at Penn, I didn't meet any of your family, but ask your father to look at the family tree. And be very careful if you go near Brooklyn again, that you mentioned Branch Rickey. He was the guy that pulled the Dodgers out of Brooklyn and took them to LA with the Giants. My one point I would like to discuss and ask you what you think. The Dodgers didn't win a World Series for 25 years since their existence in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, yet their fan base was fabulous. We always kept going, wait till next year, always strong, stadium filled. And why do you think, what drove, you think, a fan base like that put up with no wins, as opposed to today's atmosphere, if you don't win it a couple of years out?
It's an interesting question. Obviously when you, at different points in the history of the game, I think there's some of this stuff obviously predates me, so it's hard for me. I don't have firsthand knowledge of it. I think there's probably a lot of different theories of, where the game's been, why teams are where they are, why teams are responding to certain fan bases. I do think on some level, look, this is a competitive industry just like any other. When there's demand for this product, I think the industry is going to try to find a way to fill that demand. And that varies, that ebbs and flows. I think teams themselves have a lot to do with, the interest that they earn. We can do that by putting a good product on the field. We can do that by being exemplars in the community, by doing a good job with marketing and all the rest. Beyond that, I think it's hard for me to say. There's so many unique dynamics to every market. I mean, I just went from one unique market to another unique market, and you learn that, every market has its own, own foibles and own challenges. Nobody has it all. You have to deal with a lot of, different dynamics. So it's probably very individual to the situation that every team is in, wherever they're playing.
Thank you. So we have a few hands raised. First will be Ami Monson, unmute yourself. And then on deck will be Bill Chazlowski. Double deck will be Max Tracy. And you guys are up now. Go ahead, Ami.
Hi, Chaim, Rabbi Ami, graduate of Akiba in 1991, and Hagesher USY. I wanted to ask, are you familiar with Professor Adi Weiner at Wharton? I think you know the family because it's from your area, yep. But he started the Quaker Ball, Moneyball program for students to do analytics, and it's become probably one of the most popular programs at the business school of Penn. Do you think that is enhancing people's joy and love for baseball, or do you think it is just really sort of made it very linear towards the focus of just analytics and how math and analyzing the game through numbers is really, sort of like how fantasy sports has changed how we look at sports as a whole, or how people look at sports being a fan versus a fantasy fan?
Yeah. So I do know Adi. I've actually, I've spoken to, I don't know if it was a class of his or if it was to this group, but our families know each other. So, I actually have a correspondence with him. Recognizing that I probably come at this from a little bit more of an analytics background than, the average person who's involved in the game. Like I said, I don't see this as something that should decrease enjoyment of the game. I also don't see it as something that's really new or different. We're just doing it with better information now. It's funny, people don't think of batting average, let's say, as analytics because it's been around for 150 years. But not only is it not the most indicative stat of what's actually going on the field, I think if you actually had to explain it to an alien who had just come down and was watching baseball for the first time and didn't understand why walks didn't count, or why doubles didn't count more than singles, or why does an error not count, or a sac fly, I think it would actually be more complicated to explain than a lot of things that people consider to be advanced analytics. That all you're really trying to do is drill down into what players actually can control to get your best estimate of a player's true talent or what a player might be. We're always trying to do that when we watch players with our eyes. So I think it should only, if we're doing it right, it should only enhance our joy of the game. Now, I don't begrudge anybody who doesn't want that or doesn't feel they need it to enjoy the game. Look, people should enjoy it for what it is. Nobody should dictate how somebody else experiences this game. But I don't see it as something that should take enjoyment away. Now, in terms of competing, again, this is not unique to analytics. There's sometimes things that we do to compete that may not be what somebody aesthetically wants to see. But that's not a numbers thing. That's just because we're trying to win. And again, I don't see that it necessarily should decrease anybody's enjoyment of the game. And I think we all have the ability to experience the game however we want.
Thank you so much. I also wanted to say you really spoke beautifully at the tribute for Mrs. Levin. I appreciate that.
I was honored to be asked to speak.
Nice to see you, Ami. All right, so we have just a few more to go. Bill, you're next, and then Max, Joshua, Binyamin and Brian Schiff will be our final question. So go ahead, Bill, you're up.
Chaim, thank you for doing this. Lord knows you're a busy guy. I'm a huge Sox fan, but since I'm in Chicago, it means the White Sox. And I guess I have two completely unrelated questions. One's pure baseball, and that is all the arguments over manager of the four major sports, is it most overrated in baseball? And I'm talking bottom line wins and losses. I know there's a war for everything, including managers. And just common sense makes me think, in football, they're calling literally every play. In hockey, they're changing lines. In basketball, you're subbing every few seconds. So question one is, are we Goober fans way over invested in who the manager is in terms of at the end of a 162 game season, best manager in the world, worst manager in the world, plus or minus 2-3 wins? Do you buy that? And completely unrelated, is there such thing as baseball through a Jewish lens? And if so, what is your Jewish lens for baseball? Thank you.
Thanks for those questions. They're good ones. So short answer, to my opinion, to the question of, how our manager is really important, is yes. Now, if you look at the tactical decisions that managers make, I don't know if plus or minus 2 or 3 wins is the right range, but I can see there being some kind of realistic bound, within the field of people that you might realistically put in charge in a dugout, how much they can actually impact the game. What I don't think we can measure is what managers can do for the culture of a team, for the culture of an organization, and for the clubhouse. And while I think the tactical stuff obviously really matters, 2 or 3 wins, even if that is an upper bound, is very significant. Way more important to me is the cultural aspect within the clubhouse and how the team operates. And I've been fortunate. I've been around some really good ones, including Alex. And that, to me, whether it's, I worked with Kevin Cash with the Rays, I worked with Joe Madden with Alex. I think this is true of the good managers that I've worked with, is the biggest impact they make is interpersonal. It's in the leadership role. It's in setting a tone. It's in a culture. The tactical stuff matters, no question. You want to have it all. But I think that cultural aspect is so much harder to measure. You know it when you don't have it. That's for darn sure. And you can't always tell from the outside when you do have it. I think even within the game, it's really hard for me to evaluate somebody else's manager, because you don't know what's going on inside that clubhouse. And I don't know how anybody can be expected to know that, but I am convinced that it matters a ton. As far as the Jewish lens, look, I think, to me, who I am as a Jew is a big part of who I am, and I bring everything that I am to everything that I do. I think, a lot of, probably the biggest thing, the importance of family obviously is a huge thing that obviously is important to me in my personal life, but I also try to bring that to my Red Sox family and how I feel about them. And that's a very Jewish value, but it really all kind of sums up to understanding, which my Jewish education certainly taught me, that we have a responsibility to the world around us. We are responsible for the world. We are not responsible for fixing every problem, but we are definitely responsible. There's something, I actually said this to a number of people last year when we were processing, what had happened to George Floyd. It's a quote by Rabbi Heschel that he used in talking about the war in Vietnam, when he said, "Some are guilty, but all are responsible." I think that is a very Jewish value, that it's not necessarily about whether you're guilty or not, but we are all responsible for the world around us. So I think that's a really important value to bring to any leadership role, but certainly, I'm not saying I'm perfect at it. I'm sure I slip up on this every day, but I look at what I do through that lens, that if we're going to be really, really good over time, it's not just because we made some good baseball decisions. It's because so much of my job is for the 200 plus people that I work with in baseball operations, that I am trying to help them be as good as they can be. And if we do that well, we're not going to win because I beat Brian Cashman or Eric Neander. We're going to win because our 200 people beat their 200 people. And that, to me, gets to the responsibility that I have to the people around me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Max, you're up.
Hi, Chaim. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Really appreciate your insights on the game, the culture, all of it. Just really insightful, great stuff. So I'm currently a student at Northwestern in Chicago, but I'm from the Boston area, and I played for the USA Maccabi gold medal baseball team in 2017, and I'm a lifelong Red Sox fan. So I'm really interested in the baseball operations side of the game, and I'm wondering how you balance the relationships between front office executives, the analytics department, and the scouts and coaches that are responsible for player development.
Ideally, and I think a big part of what we do, not just me, but our leadership team, is the organization where all of those folks are working as well together as they possibly can, challenging each other, learning from each other, but they're all rowing in the same direction. Those are the organizations that are going to have success. Nobody has all the answers in this game. And I don't necessarily want to work with anybody who thinks that they do. We are going to figure this out by challenging each other, by making sure we are asking really good questions of each other. And everybody has a role to play in making us better and finding those solutions. So, it's kind of a vague answer in a sense, but it really is sort of the root of this whole thing, is that we all have to work together. Everybody does have their own job description. Of course, we have to execute on that. We have to do that really well. Everybody needs to understand what their part is to play, but we also need to work together in a way where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that gets to our culture. That gets to how we interact with each other. That gets to people feeling free to speak, to ask questions, to challenge each other, people being unafraid to learn. And that should be true, not just to the people who are doing your job or a job like yours, but it should be true of somebody in the organization who's doing a job that's very different from yours. And a lot of our job is to build connection and interaction between those people. And I think that's at the root of a lot of the success that I've been around in my career.
Thanks for the question, Max. Joshua, you're up.
Hi, Chaim. Nice to meet you. I'm Josh. Thank you for your insights tonight. My question, I joined a bit late, so apologies if this has already been covered a bit, but what are some of your perspectives on your different conversations across your time in sports? Have you talked to Theo Epstein at all, or what's it been like talking with Eric Neander? Kind of how are those conversations kind of shaped your experiences across sports, and kind of what are the top 2 or 3 that have been the most memorable for you throughout your career?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Obviously, when I worked with Eric, some of the conversations are a little bit different from now when we're competing with each other. The cool thing about this game is you get to build relationships with a lot of people. And some of those relationships, I think about someone like Eric, who I worked with, hand in glove for a decade, and who's like a brother to me. That relationship, obviously, there's a lot more underlying that than someone I don't know as well. But the cool thing about this is we get to build a lot of different relationships. I've had amazing mentors, continue to have amazing friends in this game. I now get to, and I was able to do this a little bit with the Rays too, you get to try to integrate people who are just starting out in this game and are maybe younger in it, and you get to sort of help develop them. And if you're doing a really good job of that, you're going to learn things from them too, because you're going to make it okay for them to challenge you. And we want to be in a room. I want to walk into a room with a lot of people that I think have answers to questions that I don't have. So to me, those connections are one of the most satisfying things about this game. And like any business, especially one as crazy as ours, there's a lot of different types of people in this game. People will do things that'll make you laugh. They'll do things that'll make you scream. That's life. I mean, that's true in any walk of life, in any job, family, your circle of friends. It's really no different in baseball. We're just the ways that we get to sort of bond with each other and build relationships, maybe a little different. But people are people. I will say this game's hard. It takes a lot out of you. So most of the people I know who are pretty good at what they do and have staying power in this game, they take their work very seriously, but they don't take themselves that seriously at all times. There's some good stories that fall out of that, some of which, you can't really repeat publicly, but it keeps it interesting.
Thanks a lot. Benjamin, you're up. Thanks for being patient.
Awesome. Just 2 questions here. You mentioned that COVID has given baseball an opportunity to try things out. has there any been talks about Bitcoin or the use of NFTs? And also, when looking at talent, you're deciding on which talent to bring to the organization. How much of a focus of who the person is off the field plays into that? I thought the tribute that you guys did with Brock Holt was beautiful, but like, how much of like who they are as a person plays into it, or is it completely of how much can they produce on the field?
Yeah, the first half of your question, I'm definitely not qualified to answer. As far as Bitcoin NFT, it's not that that I'm hiding anything. I just honestly don't know the answer. That's definitely outside of our department's umbrella. But so I'm gonna punt that one. But the other question, it's tough because every decision you make, right, it's going to be a little different. And we are not going to be perfect judges of who a person is. People may not be what their resume says they are. And I mean that about players too. Sometimes you find people who from the outside have amazing reputations and you get to know them and you're not as impressed. And there are sometimes people where it goes the other way, where some people have some things in their history that are pretty damning, but they've learned from them and they've grown. People can change and people are not always who they seem. There's no question. I think it's really important to try to do your homework. I think that's even more important in a place like here, where there's so many eyeballs on the team. Who you are is going to get exposed, I think, in most cases. This is one of those fish bowls that it can change people, but I think more than that, it kind of reveals who you are. And it doesn't mean if you're not suited to play here that you're a bad person, but it should matter to us if you're not suited to play here, if you're not going to get the most out of the experience, if you don't want what this experience will bring. So some of it certainly is making sure that things off the field in the person's personal history, there are certainly things that should be disqualifying. And there are other things that may not be disqualified, but that we would want to look into and understand. We do a lot of background work on those things. And then beyond that, there's a whole other set of, of attributes of who a person is that aren't a question of whether, you can employ them or not, but really a question of how much are they going to add to your dynamic? Are they going to be able to reach their potential? Are they going to be able to flourish and thrive the way that you want? How are they going to be when the heat is turned up, as it often is in a place like this? We got to do our homework on that too. It is very imperfect. It's hard to know that sometimes till people are in the fire, but it is worth the effort. You got to stay humble about what you really can know, but there's no question that you have to put in effort to do that. It is a necessary part of the acquisition process, in my opinion.
Thank you. And our cleanup hitter will be Brian Schiff, and maybe we'll have one or two others. Brian, you're up.
Thanks. And like everyone else said, thank you so much for doing this. This was really great. Yes, we are from Philly, and I was at Fenway last week when that daughter of mine, Juliet, was being honored, and it was there's nothing like being in Fenway Park, in my opinion, as a longtime Philadelphia and sometimes Phillies fan, but not really. But since Jeff said I'm the last question, I was going to ask something technical, but I think I'll go a different way and say, so what's your favorite baseball movie?
Oh, so I'm going to go a little off the board here. I don't know if it's necessarily my favorite, but I think that Little Big League is undervalued as a baseball movie. I'm not sure if it's the best one, but I don't think it gets enough credit.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Thanks again.
So one last question. I see Bob Epstein has raised his hand, and Gerald Schwartz, and that'll be it because Chaim has a game coming up tomorrow, I think. Go ahead,
Yes.
Bob, you're up.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for doing this. Almost every team now has a pitcher that can throw 100 miles an hour, and it seems inevitable that there's going to be some serious injuries down the line if they don't do anything about beanballs. Is there anything done now, or is there any intention to stop it?
Yeah, this has been a topic as obviously hit by pitch rates have escalated. And I know prior to the foreign substance crackdown that took place earlier this season, there was a lot of speculation about what that might do to hit by pitch rates. And it doesn't appear to have exacerbated the problem, which is good, at least the data we have right now. On some level, it's always going to be part of the game. You hope not intentionally, but these guys are competing and their control is not always going to be pinpoint. So I don't think you can ever totally remove it from the game. It's just going to happen sometimes. Guys are going to, lose control of the baseball. I do think the continued advances in, helmet technology are really important and have definitely prevented some injuries. It wouldn't shock me, and pitchers and their safety is also a priority that I think we can make some headway on. Obviously, I think if we're protecting the face and the head, we are probably taking off the table, for the most part, the majority of really severe injuries that occur. And I think we got to try to do that as much as we can. I don't think it's in our interest to try to have guys throttle back in a way where they're not competing as hard as they can. I don't think that's practical. I'm not sure it's advisable, but we should make sure that we have, a baseball that we can grip and that we have, technology in place to avoid worst case outcomes.
Thank you. Gerald Schwartz, you're the very, very, very last. Go ahead.
Last but not least, Chaim, thank you very much for appearing on this program. I have two questions which might be somewhat interrelated. Do you think that the analytics department effectively makes out the lineup card? And the second question is, I don't quite understand the rationale between, or the rationale as to why sluggers, home run sluggers like Aaron Judge and Pete Alonso are batting second in the batting order on occasion.
So to the first part of your question, I would say no, at least not in my experience. I've never been in a situation where anyone other than the manager was making out the lineup. Now, I think in any good organization that there's going to be people that the manager is going to want to solicit input from. Again, I don't see this as any different from what was happening 100 years ago. I think it's just a question of managers now doing it with better information. But, I don't know that there's any place where that actually happens. Maybe there are. I've never been in an organization like that. Now to the second part of your question, I think we've seen, this kind of take more hold in baseball of just basically having better hitters hit second, where I think historically the thought was that, the guy who hits second should be the guy who can handle the bat. I think there's two things here. One, there has been some research basically showing that 2 spot in the lineup is incredibly impactful in terms of the combination of, what it means to have that guy on base, and good hitters obviously tend to be on base a lot more, and the actual opportunities they have to hit in meaningful situations. The biggest thing I think for me is the guys at the top of the lineup get to hit more. They just come to the plate more. So you want to have your best hitters up there. And the earlier someone is in the lineup, the more they're going to get to hit. And you want your best hitters hitting most often. You do have to counterbalance that on some level with, you want those guys to hit with men on base. But I think what we've seen, the biggest thing to me that we've seen the game kind of go away from is having someone who might not be one of your best hitters, but has contact skills or is a good bunter, that guy hitting second and sucking up at bats from guys who are way more productive. I think that's something that for the most part, we don't see as much. I think teams are much more likely to just put their best hitters up near the top. But there are other things that go into it. You obviously want to line up. You want to be mindful of handedness. You want to be mindful of, the different matchups that might happen as a game unfolds. There's, spacing out your right or left-handed hitters, things like that come into play. But I think a lot of this comes from the reason why those guys are hitting second is because you win more games when those guys hit second than when somebody who's a little slap hitter hits second. It's pretty simple.
Thank you. Thank you, Chaim. So my last question is, since the 1969, when baseball changed, when they had the different divisions and everything, the Red Sox and the Yankees have made a total of 6 trades. Are your telephone lines open with Brian Cashman? You guys talk?
Yeah, we made a trade with them this winter.
With Ottavino,
Yeah. I recognizing that sometimes it's harder to line up with your direct rival sometimes. I don't think we should be afraid to make trades with the Yankees because they're the Yankees. If we're not willing to make a trade with them out of self-preservation, because if it doesn't go our way, we're going to be embarrassed or something like that, then shame on us. We should not live that way. In fact, if we have a lot of conviction in the deal we're making, we should be even more excited to make it with the division rival. generally speaking, and especially with Cash, who's really, really good at what he does. I don't think most trades you've got one team thinking they're pulling the wool over some other team's eyes. I think you're just trying to align on things that can help your organization. And I don't think you should discriminate too much in who you're doing that with.
Thanks for that. You know, every answer you made was so candid. Their insight was great. I appreciate all the time. And I want to make a plea to you on behalf of Maccabi USA. We're not asking you for comp tickets, although we wouldn't turn them down. We're not asking for a Maccabi night at Fenway, which would be a nice idea, but we really would love to have someone like you to join our organization and get involved with us. So I'm asking you respectfully to please consider getting involved with us, because we'd really love to have you part of our organization down the road.
Awesome. I'm flattered by that. Send me more information.
Okay, thanks. And with that, I want to say thank you again. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks for taking the time. It was almost an hour and a half, which is really a long period of time. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Steve Graber to finish up.